Welcome to today's podcast on the complex journey of marijuana legalization in the United States. I'm joined by Dr. Lisa Mendelsohn, a historian specializing in drug policy. Dr. Mendelsohn, let's dive right into it. Can you start by explaining the early medicinal use of marijuana in America? Absolutely. Before the 1930s, marijuana was quite commonly used in American medicine to treat a variety of conditions like pain, appetite issues, and nausea. It was available through pharmaceutical channels without much legal restriction. Then came a drastic shift with the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Can you explain its impact? The act essentially criminalized marijuana, heavily influenced by social and political factors. It marked the start of marijuana's negative public perception, fueled further by propaganda and xenophobia, particularly against Mexican immigrants. In the 1970s, there seemed to be a policy shift towards reform. What changed during that period? Well, the 1970s were pivotal. The Uniform Controlled Substances Act of 1970 standardized drug laws, although penalties varied by state. Oregon was the first state in 1973 to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana for personal use, paving the way for other states. The Reagan era in the 80s took a different turn, didn't it? Yes, that's correct. Reagan reinvigorated the war on drugs, heavily criminalizing possession. By the early 90s, marijuana possession was a criminal act in most states. Let's touch on the more recent developments. How has public opinion evolved? Public opinion has shifted significantly. In 1986, support for legalization was minimal. By 2002, 34% of Americans were in favor, almost doubling earlier numbers. Interestingly, around 80% supported medical marijuana access. Despite the growing support, marijuana remains a Schedule I drug under federal law. What are the implications of this classification? Schedule I means it's considered to have high abuse potential with no accepted medical use, conflicting with its state-approved medical uses. This creates a legal paradox where state laws permitting use clash with federal prohibition. So, what steps have been taken towards reclassification? Reclassification efforts have been ongoing since the 70s, led by organizations like NORML. Despite advocacy and even an internal DEA recommendation recognizing cannabis medical benefits, it remains in Schedule I. It seems like the debate is not just legal, but also involves societal and economic dimensions. Can you elaborate on that? Definitely. The debate encompasses fears of increased usage and dependency, adolescent exposure, and its potential gateway role. On the flip side, many see regulated legalization as an economic opportunity and a path to safer medical applications. One last thing, how do you see the future of marijuana legalization unfolding? I see a gradual trend towards broader legalization and acceptance. To navigate this complex issue, we'll need to balance public health concerns, societal norms, and economic incentives. It remains an evolving landscape. Thank you, Dr. Mendelsohn, for your insights into this multifaceted topic. It's clear that the history and future of marijuana in the U.S. involve much more than meets the eye. Until next time, stay informed and engaged. So, as we wrapped up the last segment, we were delving into the interplay between state and federal laws concerning marijuana. Let's pivot a little now and talk about how these differing laws impact real people, particularly those who use marijuana for medicinal purposes. How do these legal distinctions affect them day to day? That's a great question and an incredibly important aspect of the legalization debate. For medicinal users, inconsistent legal frameworks can mean the difference between access and denial of potentially life-changing treatment. In states where medical marijuana is legal, patients can obtain cannabis with a doctor's prescription, but they still live in fear of federal enforcement that could, in theory, criminalize their actions. Right, and it's not just about fear of legal repercussions, is it? There's also the matter of supply and demand dynamics, affecting availability and pricing. Exactly. Local regulations can limit the number of dispensaries or the kinds of cannabinoids available. What's legal in California might be restricted in a neighboring state. This disparity creates pockets of availability, which influences pricing. Patients in less lenient areas might pay more for their medication or have to travel significant distances to obtain it. Traveling for something as fundamental as health care seems particularly unfair. On that note, let's talk about the evolving public opinion on marijuana legalization. Where do we stand today compared to a few years ago? Surprisingly, public support for marijuana reform has grown considerably over the past decade. Recent surveys suggest that a significant majority of Americans favor legalizing marijuana. Over 60% supported full legalization in the last major polls. What do you think has been the driving force behind this shift in public opinion? Several factors play into this trend. Increasing exposure to research showing therapeutic benefits, awareness campaigns, and changes in popular media portrayals of cannabis use have all contributed. Importantly, too, as more states have successfully managed legalization without significant upticks in crime or health issues, the fear-based arguments lose credibility. Those are compelling points. In terms of societal impacts, what changes have states observed after making the leap to legalization? States that have legalized marijuana have reported several positive outcomes, including job creation and significant revenue boosts from taxes. Colorado, for instance, has used marijuana tax revenue to fund public schools and infrastructure projects. On the social justice front, some states have seen reductions in racial disparities in marijuana-related arrests, contributing to broader criminal justice reform efforts. Speaking of social justice, the expungement of past marijuana convictions has been a hot topic. How is that being addressed within the context of legalization? This is indeed a critical issue. States like California and Illinois have taken steps towards automatic expungement of past convictions, which can significantly impact affected individuals, restoring rights like voting or housing access. Yet, there's still much work to do to ensure comprehensive solutions nationwide. And how might further federal legislation affect these state-level expungement efforts? Federal legislation could standardize expungement processes, providing guidelines to streamline and possibly encourage a national reevaluation of marijuana-related penalties. It could also offer broader protections for users and businesses within legalized frameworks, reducing the current patchwork of laws. Looking ahead, do you anticipate federal legalization happening soon? While federal legalization is certainly on the horizon, the timeline remains uncertain. Political will at the federal level is slowing, though it's undeniably building. The ongoing normalization of cannabis, aided by state-level successes, seems poised to pressure broader legislative change eventually. One last question before we wrap up for today. What can individuals do to advocate for responsible reforms in their states? Engagement is key. People can start by educating themselves on the benefits and risks of legalization, and then participate by joining advocacy groups or reaching out to local legislators to voice their support for sensible cannabis policies that prioritize health, equity, and economic benefits. Thank you for those insights. It looks like we're nearing the end of our time here. This has been such an enlightening conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure discussing such an important and timely topic. I'm looking forward to seeing how these discussions continue to evolve. Great, and thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, stay informed and engaged.